Speaker, wars are not caused by the build-up of weapons. They are caused when an aggressor believes he can achieve his objectives at an acceptable price. The war of 1939 was not caused by an arms race. It sprang from a tyrant's belief that other countries lacked the means and the will to resist him. Remember Bismarck's phrase, "Do I want war? Of course not. I want victory." Our task is to see the potential aggressors from whatever quarter understand plainly that the capacity and the resolve of the West would deny them victory in war, and that the price they would pay would be intolerable.
I think we all need to understand that really China thinks they're fighting a proxy war through Russia, and we're seeing in some statements by the Chinese government that they want to keep the United States and our allies occupied with this war so that we can't focus on our other strategic challenges. And that's just not true. It's not going to happen. China, I think, is miscalculated, but I think they need to be called out for their subsidizing this killing that is happening on the battlefields in Ukraine.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. That was Matthew Whitaker, the U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO. And he's pointed out something that I really didn't put two and two together on until just recently. And that is that China cannot afford to have the U.S. not be distracted by Ukraine. If the U.S. and Ukraine resolve this war to the point where Russia is knocked entirely back, then we'll be able to entirely focus our attention solely on China, the remaining superpower in the world. Now, that means that, honestly, it means that China is effectively waging a proxy war using Russia against the U.S. via Ukraine. Really put some perspective on the situation. As Null Report stated, the real long-term threat to China isn't the U.S., but Russia. Regardless of whether Moscow wins or loses the war, a victorious Russia could break free from Chinese influence. A defeated one could become unstable and volatile. Beijing's ideal scenario, a weakened, war-drained Russia, according to The Hill. So we've got two potential ways this could be going here for China. It could be they're keeping the U.S. distracted, entirely focused away from China. Or they're keeping a potentially problematic neighbor from getting too big for their britches again. Either way is a victory for China. That's why this war needs to be resolved, not because it's actually a vicious, brutal, and unjust war, which it is in all respects, but because we need to refocus our attention on the real problem that is China. And that does not mean throwing Ukraine to the wolves. That means resolving this in a way that makes Russia China's worst nightmare. Unstable, volatile, problematic, and no longer controllable for China. So what about the situation with Russia? A lot of times people are like, well, it's not all Russians, and that is technically correct. It is not all Russians. But this piece from Kasagundi here really kind of put it into perspective for me. I don't think I'm showing the documents here. Let me get that up here. Right here. And before anyone hits me with the not all Russians crap, my girlfriend's half Russian. When the invasion kicked off, her relatives from Russia were messaging her like, "Don't worry, soon we'll liberate you." While Russian bombs were shelling her city and she could see BMPs rolling past her window. A lot of people forget that what those first weeks were like, but Ukrainians don't. the air raid sirens, the shaking windows, that constant pit in your stomach. Liberation looked a whole lot like tanks and mass graves. Most of the ones who showed up didn't leave alive. Even now, her Russian side won't shut up with the state TV propaganda points. She tried to explain what was happening, what she lived through, and they just parrot whatever BS was on Russia 1. Eventually, she gave up and cut them off. You can't keep talking to people who would rather believe a false version of the war than their own family. That's what decades of brainwashing does. It rots your logic and critical thinking. And just think about this. Russia's been waging a hybrid information war against the U.S. and the West for longer than most of us have been alive, if not nearly all of us. They have become very good at telling us things that are wrong and false and dressing it up to make it compelling and very much powerful, even when it's not. By the way, glad to see you, Al. Always glad to have you on board. Always happy to see anybody else joining in. So if you're here and can just chime in, I'd appreciate seeing your comments so I can acknowledge you and say hello. Now, the big news out of Ukraine this week is enormous protests taking place. Now, I'm going to have to, in a lot of ways, high level this here. The Russians have been just absolutely ecstatic on the Russian channels. Oh, they're protesting against Zelensky. They're going to overthrow their government again and install one that's more favorable to the Russians. Let's talk about what's really going on. There's a law that went through the Verkhovna Rada, their equivalent of our House of Representatives, our Congress. And it got through, and apparently it got signed by President Zelensky. Some of the details are a little bit still shaky for me, so you'll have to apologize. I'm telling you the best information I have right now. Now, I do also have to state that I do not have visibility into the internal politics of Ukraine. I don't have visibility into the nature of the bill or how it directly impacts. All I have are the outside views that I can see. But the people of Ukraine saw this bill, saw what it did, and decided they wanted nothing of it, even though President Zelensky signed it into law. So what was this bill? High level, there are two anti-corruption organizations that kind of the West had insisted that Ukraine set up. And the bill removed some of the independent nature of those and put them under the control of the executive. Now, there's a lot of things to be said about that. This is actually very similar to the U.S. system as it is right now. I don't think it is necessarily naturally corrupt. However, it could be easily corrupted. But then again, the system that they already had could also be corrupted because there was indications of Russian influence taking place in these anti-corruption bodies that was in there. So overall, we're looking at a bill that changed the independence of these anti-corruption bodies, and huge protests came up from the populace. Now, there's a little bit of a timeline here. July 22nd, the bill was passed, which eliminated the independence of these and transferred the key powers to the prosecutor general. The Rada speaker and the president signed it on the same day, so altogether they did sign it. Rallies began in Kyiv and other cities within 3 hours of this law being signed. The media and international partners expressed concern. July 23rd, we're just talking 3 days ago now, mass protests take place in Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa, and Dnipro, people demanding the repeal of the law. The leadership of these organizations, these anti-corruption organizations, says the changes threaten the reforms and call on Zelensky to block the law. Zelensky promises to take the protest into account and prepare a new law. July 24th, just 2 days ago, literally 2 days after the first protest began, 48 MPs from different factions submitted a bill for consideration, which proposed to return the independence of these organizations. The president submitted his own bill, 13533, as urgent, which restores all procedural powers and independence of these two anti-corruption organizations. Both structures support the new bill, participate in its preparation, and call on the Rada to adopt it without delay. The new law takes into account, according to President Zelensky, citizens' opinions and contains guarantees of the absence of Russian influence. It also introduces mandatory polygraph tests for employees with access to state secrets. Now, I worked for a law enforcement organization, not as an officer, but as communications, and I had a conversation with one of their experts in polygraph tests. And let me tell you, polygraph tests are not in and of themselves determinations of fact. They're basically checking your vital signs, and you need to be an experienced reader of both the vital signs and of the person you're talking to be able to actually interpret these results. So therefore, it's only as good as the psychological capabilities of the person you're talking to. But either way, that's not the important piece. So high level, this is what happened. Now I'm going to kind of burn through a bunch of the commentary that came out from this. From first off, Dr. Anna Odesitka stated that they're not protesting Zelensky. They're protesting this law. They know they can't have a totally open system, but they don't want to compromise their democracy. They want a law that both addresses security concerns while being transparent and independent as much as possible. They also want this done openly. They don't need foreign opinions. They want to argue with themselves, but they're always going to be united against Russia. No surrender. Zelensky saw the protests and responded by meeting our demands. Democracy works. Now, honestly, if you saw any of the videos of the protests or any of the information of the protests, I've got a little bit of something. You'll see how organic they really were. This whole situation is uniquely precarious for Ukraine right now, not because of the political needs of the moment, but because the Russians are going to take advantage of even this amount of protest. There was a lot of different opinions on this. Some said they oppose shutting it down. Then this is the video. This is the picture I was mentioning here. The Ukrainians didn't have neatly pre-printed signs. If you've seen a protest in the U.S., all of a sudden, these pre-printed signs that have got perfect slogans already market tested and available are suddenly showing up within minutes of whatever they're trying to protest. That's not organic. These are people with cardboard from the post office and markers from the store. This is what organic protest looks like, not that garbage with pre-printed signs. Again, it targets a specific law, not the president. They're not calling to change the government. Russian influencers are trying to spin this as anti-government and claiming that, and some of them are claiming that it's anti-war. It's not. This thread is excellent. It's just too long for me to go into right now. I will just post the link here. They talk about the context of the law and the changes therein. And then there's the other perspective. Astrea Intel stated Nabu was compromised with Russian agents and said that this law change was necessary. Again, there are opposing opinions at work here. And just because the opinions are opposed does not mean that they are not also pro or want Ukraine to succeed in this war against Russian aggression. Some people even claim there were 0 arrests. Well, these were investigative organizations. They were not law enforcement organizations. There's refer things for prosecution. There were indications that some things had been let basically sit, where there was clear signs of corruption that wasn't being prosecuted or passed on for prosecution. And that's a legitimate concern. But again, we're talking baby and bathwater situation here, and some people are trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This, of course, was the statement that they did nothing was debunked by seeing their numerous high-profile cases, like this one of a member of Zelensky's own party, Servant of the People, throwing evidence over the wall in hopes of it not being tied to her, this bribe money. There's a lot, just a ton of things to talk about on this. I wish I had more time. I've been gathering this information from the last several days, and so I've got a lot of high level stuff and some of it that really digs deeper. But I'm trying to give you the nitty gritty of what I do know and what I can confirm. President Zelensky released several statements on this. Initially, defending the law change, and then but stating it was because of the challenges they had with Russian interference. And then he said that like, for instance, cases were lying dormant for years. And as the protests gained energy, Zelensky, I wouldn't say changed his position, I would say adapted. The thing is, I'm not one of the people that believes that a leader is always right, and that they therefore cannot course correct because they were always right. President Zelensky definitely seems to have recognized that there was an issue here, a real issue, and the people were concerned and had legitimate concerns with it. And so he started calling meetings and getting people together to talk about the various and sundry challenges of this law and what needed to change. And gradually, a new law began to take shape. He did state that they were listening to everything that was being said on the streets. And finally, they produced this new bill, which, from all indications, restores the independence of these anti-corruption organizations and provides for ways to root out Russian interference. So overall, the long story short is, it looks like the democracy is working. It's a challenge. It always is, especially in these situations. Even so, President Zelensky praised the people who came out to protest. It is important that Ukrainians react so adequately to all events. Ukraine is people who care. Of course, the humor or parody account Darth Putin stated, "I'm not sure what to do about Ukrainians protesting a law they don't like. I like that they're protesting, but I don't want Russians to get any ideas." Tricky. And there's more talking about the fact that these rallies show that their government is still working. The Ukrainians recognize and have the ability to recognize when things are wrong and fix them through the legal methods of their own government. Or as J.P. Lindsley stated, "What do you notice about these Ukrainians protesting the government in public squares? No meltdowns, no looting, no masks, no fires." And that's because the Ukrainians have a common enemy. That is Russia. This is just a moment. It is just a little fly in the ointment. It is nothing compared to the challenges they truly face right now. This is resolved. This can be fixed. Russia, on the other hand, needs to be defeated, not repaired. Al states, "You can't really blame the Ukrainians for letting some things sit dormant. Happens in the U.S. all the time. Sometimes red tape and bureaucracy cause things to not get looked at." It's true. And sometimes there are political motivations for things to not get looked at, especially in the U.S. And right now, Ukraine's got a lot of really important things that they have got to focus on. This is just one that didn't have to happen. Things needed to change, but they didn't need to change in the way that they did. All right, so that's the big kerfuffle that's happening over in Ukraine right now. This bill that initially stripped the anti-corruption agencies of their independence, and then after protests, a new bill that restored that independence and provided for some ways to keep the Russian influence out of them. So let's talk about President Trump for a bit. I kind of talked about this in my previous live stream on a commute. So Igor Sushko stated there that President Trump's sudden shift in tone against Russia and desire to aggressively arm Ukraine probably as a result of intelligence briefings he chose to receive in the aftermath of this backlash from the DoD halting weapons to Ukraine. And I'm going to summarize this. It looks like after a bit, that Donald Trump often says, well, I didn't hear about that. I don't know anything about that. I didn't hear anything about that place being struck. Well, now, after it seems like he's been getting actual briefings on what's going on, he'll often reference unprompted things that are happening in Ukraine and show that he is actually informed about what's going on. So this is good news, but as always with Donald Trump, it's good news and it's bad news, and it keeps going back and forth. Donald Trump announced that Europe is going to pay 100%, basically making the U.S. a nice grocery store for arms sales. We sell it to Europe. Europe gives a portion of that, most of that, whatever they want to Ukraine. The U.S. walks away with cash, and the Europeans walk away with weapons. How that's going to pan out depends on how Europe wants to pay for it. Conversely, the United States suddenly deployed B-6112 thermonuclear gravity bombs to a nuclear weapons storage facility in England. This is an indication that the U.S. is prepared for Russia's malingering and nuclear threats. We aren't letting our nuclear stockpile waste away. Instead, we're going to deploy it in positions where if Russia gets too big for their britches, they'll find out how much their britches can hold. President Zelensky played this whole thing right. Now, this is from back on July 16th. The U.S. has always supported us, he said. We are very grateful to the White House, but Biden couldn't end the war. I'm confident President Trump can. I believe this will be the key difference between them. This was in an interview with Newsmax. This is great work by Zelensky. Totally turns the nature of the relationship around, saying, look, Biden supported us, but Biden couldn't fix it. Trump might be able to. Of course, I mentioned previously the 50 days that the U.S. said the Russians had until secondary sanctions would be applied. Of course, Lavrov mocked that, saying 50 days. Before that, it was 24 hours, then 100 days. We've been through all of this before. They're basically saying Trump's going to chicken out. And he might. I don't know. I'm not Trump. But Russian propagandists, on the other hand, said, hey, look, we got 50 days. We need to maximize the intensity of Russian strikes against Ukraine's critical infrastructure during this 50-day period. More strikes against civilians and peaceful cities. That's how Russia is going to use their 50-day reprieve. And I mentioned this previously. Trump would go and say to Melania Trump, you know who, I spoke to Putin today and we had a wonderful conversation. And she'd say, oh, really? Another Ukrainian city was just hit. And it really seems that Donald Trump is starting to see that Vladimir Putin is just stringing him along. He's not actually wanting to end this war. He just wants to keep the U.S. out of it as much as he can, so that he can win it outright. This has resulted in a situation where potentially secondary sanctions may happen even before the 50-day deadline. Ignore this graphic down here. That's from South Park. Somebody was posting about it, where they did a whole episode about Donald Trump. But so it looks like Trump may actually be looking at secondary sanctions sooner than later. We'll see. So let's talk about Shahed production for just a moment here. Russians are demonstrating their mass production of Shahed or Iran 2 kamikaze drones. They intend to attack Ukraine with 2,000 of these drones simultaneously in the future. But notice what I'm not seeing on this assembly line. I'm not seeing much modern automation. Yes, there's some machines like machines, but each one of them has to be touched by hand and manually controlled, and the inputs put into it and taken from it. This is not a true modern manufacturing system. This is a lot of manual, hand-built drones. They're just doing it with a lot of people, which is how they're able to produce so many drones at once. From Tatarigami UA, was a former officer of the Ukrainian military. They are talking about these recent videos and photos from the Shahed drone production. Why can't Ukraine strike this facility? Hit the archer, not the arrow. Well, there's more to it than that. For one, and I'm going to just summarize what he says. Number one, it's a long way away. It's not a modest workshop. It's not small. You couldn't hit it with one drone or two drones and take out the facility. It's enormous. You'd have to hit it with hundreds of drones, or with much larger payload drones. So therefore, it's long distance away. It's a large facility. Standard drones aren't going to do it. You'd need to be able to target it with larger, nastier stuff to take it out. In that same vein, billionaire and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt produces drones to intercept Shaheds with basically a cooperation with Ukraine. He's financing these interceptor drones to intercept these Shaheds. Tremendous work by a man who obviously puts his money where his mouth is. All right, news out of Ukraine. We already talked about the Zelensky and the bill and all of that stuff with the anti-corruption stuff. Other pieces of news out of Ukraine itself. There was a plane in the air over Ukraine that was not a military one. This happened back on the 12th or so of this month. An Antonov AN-124, one of the largest cargo planes in existence, managed to get rebuilt in Ukraine and then take off and fly to Germany. This is spectacular. It has been impossible to get a significant aircraft moving in over the airspace that wasn't a fighter loaded with all kinds of counter flares and chaff and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to get anywhere. So it's tremendous that they were able to bring that airplane out, and now it can be used as part of the war effort to transport large items. Antonov actually put out a video showing this happening. It's got copyrighted music all over it, so I'm not going to play it for you, but I will post the link here. You guys can check it out at your leisure. The Ukrainians also have new anti-drone ammunition. Now, typically when you think of anti-drone ammunition, you got electronic warfare, which is basically electronic stuff to drop it down. You have interceptor missiles or rockets, okay? Then there's shotguns. But for your average soldier who's wandering around the battlefield of Ukraine, he doesn't really want to carry both a shotgun and a rifle. So a new ammunition has been developed. It takes basically a standard 5.56 round. It changes out the center for a apparently, the best I've been able to tell, kind of a discarding sabot type situation, and 5 fast-moving pellets that are placed inside. And they can shoot, of course, since it's now in a semi-automatic or fully automatic rifle, you can shoot these out, and basically you've turned your AR-15 or M4 rifle into a shotgun. You do several of these rounds, and it should have a similar effect to shooting a shotgun. So it has several balls inside, and the sabot, it fires, the sabot disappears, the 4 or 5 balls, then fly out in a shotgun-like pattern. Interesting to see, and we'll see how that works out. Currently, the statement is that they're just supposed to have a magazine of this stuff, quickly switch out to that, and then, run the charging handle, and then they can start shooting with this shotgun style round for the M4. The M4, the 5.56 is pretty small for this type of payload, though. We'll have to see if it's any good. I've not gotten any good reports one way or the other. More demonstration of the German Rheinmetall Skynex air defense cannon in action. Great short video not going to run it today, but I'll post the link here if you're interested in watching it. Just understand that the Germans are providing a lot of air defense for Ukraine. There was a successful attack back on the 9th of a Ukrainian airbase with 2 cruise missiles, or Kinzhal, 2 Kinzhals and 2 KH-101s. They did show fires in the area afterwards. I've not gotten a good damage report beyond that. Zelensky is calling for their own crews to their own production facilities to get between 500 and 1,000 interceptor drones made per day. Says it's very challenging, but it's now a personal responsibility for all officials involved. This is what's going to have to happen if they're going to seriously put a dent in all of Russia's production. Let's move on to the stuff out of Russia itself. This is back on the 23rd. That's just a couple days ago. Reports and videos surrounding the airport of Sochi, Russia are appearing. It appears that the Ukrainians successfully targeted the oil storage facility next to the airport. Skynet's awfully close to Skynet. Yes. I thought of that too. Now, this is from back on the 16th, but this has been ongoing for a while. Russia is now putting up new billboards stating that the people of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are subhuman and Untermenschen, or racially inferior. They're preparing their people to attack these Baltic nations. They're preparing them to believe that they are lesser beings, that they aren't even human. A trick that has worked for dictators and tyrants the world over to start new wars. Russian diplomats, when they come and talk to Ukrainian diplomats, still say things like, "You don't exist as a nation or a country," even saying that they're just Russians. Continually denying the existence of the people that are kicking their butts. Now, this one I want to talk about for just a moment here. So, Russia has amassed a record number of missiles, roughly 2,000 units. This is back on the 11th. Now, Russian missile production has greatly expanded because they're getting a lot more support from China. They're still getting Western components despite the sanctions. But primarily, they're getting things from China that are supporting their ability to produce new weapons and keep the war going. But in this case, they're trying to build up another supply, basically a core supply of missiles. You see, what seems to have been happening is that Russia would try and build up a supply for a big attack. And then, of course, the U.S. would say something and they'd get all mad. And so they'd launch everything they had, and then you have to build up their supply again. Russia's trying to make it so they don't have to do the build up the supply part of that again. We'll see. It seems like it's working. Here's a cute tank here. This is actually a tank underneath all this junk right here. It took, as I understand it, around 60 FPV drones to finally penetrate and destroy or knock out the tank. They've got so much stuff. Let me mute that here. They had so many layers of things over this that they had to just keep pounding the same spot over and over and over until they penetrated and stopped this Tsar tank. Ukrainians managed to hit the Signal radio plant in Stavropol, and preliminary battle damage assessment indicates it is relatively minor damage with localized fires. Again, they did hit one of the production facilities, but this will not take the entire facility out. The same problem as previously mentioned for that other plant, namely that it's too large of a plant to be taken out by individual or small groups of drones. They would have to have a much larger overall drone, larger drones, more payload, more of them in order to be able to take out a facility like this. Still, it was a successful attack, and this facility actually produces jamming stations and electronic warfare systems. I mentioned earlier, in fact, I should have put this with it. The Russians are trying to make it look like the people in the Baltics are lesser people. They're not even people or subhuman. They're now claiming that the Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia lost their independence after the collapse of Russia. The USSR, and are now on the fringes of Europe. Let's look at the stats. The average salary in these countries is 1,700 euros to 2,200 euros. Russia's around 600 euros. So they're trying to say that these nations are not prospering in Europe, and yet they are. According to Knoll reports, Russia is scaling up arms production up to 5,000 drones and 250 missiles monthly of all types. In 2025, it plans to build 1,500 tanks, mostly Soviet upgrades, with just 280 T-90Ms. Tu-160 and Su-57 programs don't look like they're moving anywhere. So Russia's gradually waging, besides the missiles, a lower tech war than they could have previously. I'm skipping over a lot of repeats on this stuff here. And from the Ministry of Defense of the UK, an intelligence update. Since May 2025, Russia has rolled out extensive cellular internet blackouts across its territories. Lots of them happening. I'm going to kind of skip through here. This suggests that the goal is tighter control over online information. Fixed line or wired internet slowdowns are rising too, with the Russian censorship agency testing full blackouts and throttling access to platforms like YouTube. Basically, they're looking for ways to restrict people's access to information, just like dictators like to do. Moving to the international. In fact, I need to take a second here and take a slurp. That's getting a lot of scratch in my throat right here. International situation. This is from the 21st. 4 Ukrainian fighter jets unintentionally entered Romania's airspace this morning as they were dispersing their planes from Ukrainian airfields during a major Russian drone and missile attack. A Romanian man filmed the aircraft flying over their country. Romanians say the intrusion was deemed involuntary and quickly managed. In other words, the Ukrainians scrambled to get their fighters off the tarmac in anticipation of a targeted strike. And during that process, they ended up accidentally entering Romanian airspace, then turning around and heading back to Ukrainian. So interesting, and Romania is at least watching this situation. So I'm going to summarize this one. Spain sold basically a high precision barrel manufacturing machine to China, and China sold it to Russia, allowing them to bypass sanctions. Not even going to go into it any farther than that. Germany is stating that they're going to fund the delivery of mass-produced long-range weapon systems and that are co-developed with Ukraine, with massive 480 kilogram, or that'd be about 1,000 pounds, warheads that could be deployed soon. You get 1,000-pound warhead or 480 kilogram warhead on a ballistic missile with the range to hit facilities across Russia. That's a game changer. That could really make some work of some of these facilities, effectively allowing them to become to bomb the facilities of their enemies, not have to just basically hit them with little pinpricks, but with big bombs. Estonia kicked out another Russian national for being a security threat. He said, as they was showed out of the country, "You've ruined my life." But he was cozying up to the FSB, so, I'd say he did it to himself. Lithuania plans to contribute up to 30 million euros toward the purchase of a U.S.-made Patriot air defense system. Now, there are a variety of air defense systems. In fact, I've even saw somewhere where the Ukrainians were asking the U.S. for updates and additional stuff for the Hawk air defense system, more missiles and equipment and updates, because apparently it's actually really good at intercepting a lot of this stuff, a lot of the Cold War era stuff. The Patriot is good at hitting those ballistic missiles, the things that are harder to hit than you could hit with like drones or things like that. So the Patriot has its specific niche where it is excellent, where there's no other system that can get even close. That's why this is important. Germany's already delivered 3. It looks like they're going to deliver a total of 5 Patriot systems overall. And they'll also receive Iris-T systems from Germany. These have also been very successful in getting cruise missiles. Again, but the Patriots, they're great for the ballistics. Al says, I believe Taiwan still uses the Hawk. They've upgraded it a lot too and still like it. Yeah, I mean, sounds like it was a really good system. It just never got deployed from the U.S. perspective, really, to speak of. And I'm just going to mention this one because I don't have good visibility into this conflict yet or what's going on. Apparently, a border conflict over a temple happened between Cambodia and Thailand. I have not had good information on this yet, but there is some stuff out there. So they've been clashing back and forth over this area. Again, I don't have good info, but it looks like something about a temple and maybe a border dispute. Not sure, but one more place is getting hot. Interesting to see. And I'm going to briefly share this video. This is from IPA, or I'm going to pronounce it IPA. She took her dog for a walk since the dog was scared inside the apartment, but this is in Lviv, less than 100 kilometers from Poland, and often called safe. So I'm going to play this, and you guys can, if you would listen, that'd be wonderful.
Hello everyone from Lviv, Ukraine.
And that's all across. That's all the way across the country from the front lines. Crazy. Speaking of the front lines, let's go ahead and jump into it. I've had some problems with my computer in the last little bit, so some of this might not have come through all right, but let's go through it. How about a little perspective? If we look at this map, you'll see this dark red line. That's the end of 2022 versus 2025. There's very little real difference in the overall macro situation. You can see some differences, especially near Donetsk, where the Russians have made significant progress. But when you look at it in the macro situation, over 3 years of fighting, Russia's gained this area near Donetsk and a few other little pieces. Heavy fighting has erupted for the village of Oleksivka in the Sumy region, which is right here on this map here. It's near Andriivka. This is currently still occupied by Russian forces, but Russian sources are complaining that the situation is deteriorating due to the arrival of a significant amount of Ukrainian forces. That was from today. So this situation is ongoing over there in Sumy. Border guards repelled a major Russian assault near Bilohorivka. No survivors, they say. I don't always take that at their word on that, but apparently all of the armors and vehicle didn't make it back. Trajectory of Russian missiles and drones hit Ukraine overnight, with the focus apparently on Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Zaporizhia. This is the first time we're seeing them focus quite so close in some time. They didn't hit a lot of things. I mean, yeah, there were some miscellaneous ones that went a little bit deeper, but it's clear that Russia's getting kind of ticked off about the whole thing. Russian assault in Pokrovsk direction also repelled by Ukrainian artillery and special forces, with all the Russian armor destroyed. War Gonzo's report kind of gives a much rosier picture, saying that they've taken more stuff than I'm seeing on the rest of the maps. I'm not going to go through it all, just understand that except for the fact that they're rosier, it seems to generally at least comport with the other information. There were a few changes on the ground. The Russian flag was raised in Zeleny High, west of Donetsk, as well as in Malivka, Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, as shown below. They also infiltrated the Kremina forest and raised a flag 3 kilometers deep. There was a sabotage attempt on a Su-27B that the Ukrainians posted about. They damaged it. They really probably ought to just start getting serious about planting some explosives on them. Now, this is from the last night. The massive drone attack was actually the Ukrainians striking all across Russia and occupied Crimea. You can see all the little red arrows here. This is reversing the situation from tonight. From the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces likely seized Novo-Ekonomichne, northeast of Pokrovsk, and appear to be conducting limited sabotage and reconnaissance missions into Pokrovsk amid ongoing Russian efforts to envelop the town. The situation in Pokrovsk is, I would say, not quite stable, but not exactly changing rapidly. And finally, we got the deep state map here. There were some interesting changes here. For one thing, the Ukrainians retook Andriivka and Kindrativka from the Russians up here in the Sumy, I believe it is, Oblast. They still hold on to this little sliver over near, over in Sudza area, which is the name of it's escaping me right now. The Russians seem to have reopened Vovchansk front right here and taken kind of just this little nubby right here. Overall, this is probably the weirdest piece right here, with the Russians apparently having stuck their neck out quite a bit through Holubivka and Radkivka. How the Ukrainians respond to this will tell a lot more about how robust their defense is in the area around Kupiansk, but it will be some time before we know more. As always, the situation near Pokrovsk continues to deteriorate slowly. And really, that's kind of the long story short as far as the changes on the front lines. I've got a few interesting extras, but at this point, I'm going to be talking a lot about opinion and things like that. This, by the way, is from the new U.S. Army Tank Platoon Doctrine, talking about using M1 Abrams to target drones and quadcopters. And having kind of reviewed this with a few rather more military people that know more, this basically comes down to the same tactics they developed during World War II, which is basically to hide and not be seen. Then if you are seen and are directly attacked, attack with anything you've got. They give you a few principles for potentially hitting it, but firing a 120 millimeter cannon and hitting a quadcopter drone would be quite the feat. Just saying. Russia sentenced an entire family of 3 in Luhansk region just because they love Ukraine, and the man is shown putting the 3 fingers of the trident over his chest. That's the Ukrainian spirit right there. He knew they could kill him, but he stayed true to himself. A sharp contrast to Russians who do anything, even kill, for money. This story is from the start of the war, and I believe it is slightly dramatized. But basically, it's talking about at the beginning of the war, the Ukraine state security told Zelensky they had 15 minutes to leave or they'd be surrounded. And Zelensky said, okay, everybody, I'm not going to judge anyone who wants to leave. Just do it now. And then if we're not here, the people will stop fighting. He stayed. The people fought. And Kyiv was saved. Over in Venice, of all places, a Ukrainian, off-duty Ukrainian soldier on leave came across a teen laying bleeding in the streets. He pushed through the crowd, pulled out a tourniquet he was carrying while on vacation, and stopped the bleed. That's the type of people that Ukraine is sending to war. Even in the times that they're supposed to be off, they're still prepared. And finally, we're going to end with this short video here.
Зловили дрони і зловилося оленятко маленьке. Тікай, 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 бігом, тікай, бігом.
In case you had a difficulty seeing it, that was a deer that had its horn stuck in the anti-drone netting. And these soldiers didn't shoot the deer. They took some time and set the deer free. The Ukrainians care. They care about the animals. They care about the people. It's just impressive. It really is. And on that note, that is everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Glad to have you guys here. It's been just about 52 minutes live streaming here. Thank you for joining me. Always happy to have you with me. You guys make all the difference. Al, in particular, love it when you're on board. I really appreciate it. Makes the difference. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.